Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek UK. I'm PRWeek reporter Elizabeth Radu. In today's episode, we are going to focus on the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity, which begins this weekend, starting on the 22nd of June. To help unpack all of this, I'm joined by three attendees at this year's festival. First up, we have Kate Stanner, who spent almost 2 decades at Saatchi & Saatchi. She joined Edelman as its International Chief Creative Officer last year. Kate has also served as a jury president at Cannes Lions and won multiple Cannes Lion awards. Next, we have Eleanor Sullivan, Chief Strategy Officer at Burson. Having attended Cannes Lions previously, Eleanor is also serving as a shortlisting juror for this year's PR Lions. And finally, we have Natalie Moores, Brand Future Director at Smarts. Natalie will be speaking at Cannes as part of this year's major program. Welcome all. So let's begin. What are you looking forward to the most this year?
I think for all of us, we've noticed that earned is becoming the expectation and kind of the baseline and the standard for Cannes. So in the spirit of being an absolute earned first geek, I'm looking forward to seeing more work outside of the PR category and inside the PR category. As you mentioned, because I'm shortlisting, I'm slightly interested to see whether some of my scores or predictions make it through to the shortlist and the medal. So we'll see whether I was right or wrong when we're there.
Natalie, what about you? What are you looking forward to this year?
I am most looking forward to going for the very first time. It's going to be my first time speaking at Cannes because it's my first time also attending Cannes. So I think for me, it's all so mythical and hypothetical at the moment. And I hear all of these wonderful stories of how it is and what it feels like to be there. But I haven't actually experienced it for myself yet. So looking forward to getting back and telling everyone all the things, whether they're true or not from what I've heard.
And Kate, what are your thoughts about this year's festival?
Last year, I was president of the film jury. You know, the experience of Cannes as a judge is one I adore because you kind of feel you have purpose and you've earned your right to be there. So for me, that's sort of quite important. And this year, I will be a delegate going with Edelman, so a different part of our industry. So I'm really excited, as we were just saying, how the earned discussion is an important one that's permeating well beyond the PR category. And I think we all understand that. And we will say this, won't we? But I think we are seeing it emerge as a earned-led thinking and strategy can be a primary way brands communicate rather than using it as a secondary amplification tool. I think we are seeing it shift into center and core to marketing strategies as well as common strategies.
That's so exciting. So for those who have never been to Cannes, it can appear like one continuous beach party. How do you balance the networking and the events with the actual business objectives and the creative inspirations of the festival?
Well, I can start, seeing as Nat hasn't been there. And I went for the first time 21 years ago when I was on the film jury, and it was very different then. It was like 21 jurors. We were locked in a room for 8 days, and I never saw a glass of rosé or any daylight. So I'm hoping I can have some rosé, some daylight. For me, it's always about the work. So that's the balance. I just really, really love and feel privileged to sort of see as much work as possible from as many different places as possible. Gives you a chance to really understand, the power of creativity and what it can actually achieve. So for me, that's the exciting thing. And of course, catching up with loads of friends.
I totally agree. I always think about Cannes as it is an industry conference, and many industry conferences, as we know, are not set with quite such a wonderful backdrop as the Croisette. So if we were perhaps in a less glamorous city, I won't name any names, would people still have the perception of Cannes that they have? Probably not, because what's really happening is people sitting in jury rooms, sitting in theatres, listening to incredible speakers that are, standout brains in our industry, and meeting and networking people who will shape your career. So I think if we think about that and less about the backdrop, it is an industry conference, and actually Cannes does many of them, not just the Cannes Lions conference. So if you work in property, for example, you may also be off to Cannes once a year. So it just is important to try and separate out the backdrop from the conference part, I think.
I think that's so fair. I think people tend to forget that it is for work and it's not a big party. So Are any of you concerned that the festival may look a little bit extravagant in 2026, especially given the industry's consolidations, the cost cutting going on, and also with the geopolitical strife going on?
Kate, you just mentioned the word privilege before, and I think that is definitely the word that surfaces for me when I think about going. I think it absolutely, of course, it is a privilege to be able to take a week. This is work still, but it's a week away from the day to day, and it's a week away from the desks, and to be able to go and be in the presence of the best in our industry, it's a huge privilege, and I don't think that should be underestimated. But equally, it's so much harder to break down some of the silos and actually get into rooms with people or get, into conversations with people that happen more naturally. So I think that can be this amazing opportunity to really sort of cut through some of the normal ways that we have to behave in this like hamster wheel of how we all exist day to day. I still think there's so much value in bringing people together in person from around the world and allowing those interactions and organic conversations to happen. And I think the point about the backdrop is absolutely also relevant here. I think that kind of probably amplifies some of that concern. But also, this is such a long-standing event, and I think its value has to, stand way more strongly than the kind of lovely glasses of rosé that sit around the side of it.
It's often had this challenge of perception and what's going on. And I think a few years ago, there was a lot of discussion around the tech companies coming in and being incredibly flamboyant. Cannes itself decided to find other ways to make sure that there's a hell of a lot of input going in there and a much broader sense of people benefiting from what's going on there. So I think that was a tipping point. I think you're right. We're in an extraordinary time in the world. We're operating in business. It is a time of extreme concern, fear, and optimism, which is weird to be able to say that at the same time. But I think that's what we face every day. And I think in many ways, all of that will be represented. One of the things that's so important is not to lose our optimism and sense of the power that creativity and creative thinking can have on solving so many of our problems. So for me, that is the positive effect of the collaboration and convening power of Cannes.
I think Cannes is not a naive place, and you look at the speakers taking any of the stages, they are so connected to culture, either globally or locally. You won't find many stages that won't be very alive to the realities of the industry, the realities of the geopolitical situation. So the few times that I have been, whatever's been happening in the world has been quite openly addressed, whether that be AI, whether that be, I remember I was there the first year after COVID as well. And actually, there is a lot of discussion about how, to Kate's point, you can cut through and use creativity in a really powerful way, despite cultural realities, however challenging or optimistic they may be. So I think it's not happening in a vacuum or in a bubble, and you actually get a lot of great advice of how to navigate the challenging times we've talked about.
I really think that's a really wonderful point. And if I think just to the talk that I'm going to be doing on the Wednesday, we've got the world number 3 free diver coming with us who is from Ukraine. And she's talked to me a lot about kind of her relationship with that geopolitical landscape. And I think that has been really kind of prominent and present in our preparations for the talk, and something that, feels really like a hopeful and a good opportunity is to put that on the stage in the right kind of way, to platform a kind of female athlete from somewhere that's experiencing this kind of awfulness and atrocity. I think Cannes can also be a really good opportunity to kind of put the right people and platform the right people on into those spaces.
When you look at the PR Lions shortlist, what is the X factor that separates a good campaign from a Grand Prix winner? What is one element that would make a jury look at a piece of work and say, wow, I wish my agency had done that?
I think, as we said, earned first thinking is becoming center stage. So seeing something that has that at its very core, from strategy to creative through to distribution, is absolutely right. And Kate's already mentioned the move from just seeing PR as distribution to seeing it at the very front end of everything. But culture is thrown around as a word a lot at Cannes. But what really makes PR work stand out is where there was a real astute understanding of the culture and earning your way into that so that you can improve your brand's, reputation or brand perception or whatever your objectives might be. So seeing that from start to finish is important. But the point about culture, it's something that probably every entry will talk about, or many of the entries will talk about. There are very few brands that really get invited into culture and stay there and actually earn their right to participate and contribute to that culture. And that's where I think it's a very small nuance. That's where I think you really see a distinction between the good and the excellent.
Do you have any examples of brands that tap into culture very well?
Yeah, not to hop to one of your other questions, but I think the work that Vaseline does is outstanding. So the work that was talked about a lot from last year, which we probably all know, Vaseline Verified, that insight came from deep within a cultural truth about their product. People misuse it. And from a PR perspective, you can really admire it because a lot of organizations would think this was a problem and they saw it as a huge opportunity because it was true. So they didn't try to change culture, but they earned their way into it by offering people verification for the Vaseline hacks that were official and were appropriate and were safe and science-backed and all that kind of thing. So I think that is extraordinary work and shows you earned first thinking. Really admire that. And the sequel that they have in for this year is also outstanding.
Eleanor, you've robbed my answer there because I literally had. No, I think so. My immediate thought when I saw that question was almost about a kind of simplicity or a cleanliness of either the insight and then, the response to that. And I think that so much of the best work that I look at and that I see just feels so simple and clean, and then also feels like something that only that brand could do. And Vaseline, I think, it was an amazing example of productizing something that potentially could have absolutely been seen as a problem to a lot of other brands, and the way that they let down the guardrails and allowed that to fuel the creativity and the response, I think, is really, really admirable. Another piece of work that jumps out in terms of that kind of simplicity, and I know that we'll talk about tech and AI a little later, but I always come back to the O2 Scammer Granny campaign just as an example of its use of AI, but in order to create something that couldn't have been done without it, rather than for tech's sake. So solving that problem that absolutely related to the telecoms, the mobile phone industry, but doing that with the technology in a way that couldn't have been done by humans. And therefore, that just feels so celebratory and so positive. I think would be a couple of examples that would come to mind.
Having worked from an advertising agency perspective, we would often be doing a lot of earned work. And I think actually this is a big discussion as well. What I realize is we never fully optimize that thinking. And I think the power of true earned work is how you understand those levers and really optimize that story. Really understand how a story can be placed, can ride culture and become culture. And as Eleanor said, that is a word that literally is bandied about by everyone all of the time, all at once. and I think getting more specific on it is going to be one of our jobs in the future so that we can be articulate about that. So I do think that there is at the heart of these very powerful stories, recognizing, and it's not to say that paid is not part of that story to amplify, but I think that the work that really, really does sort of understand how to ride it. And you're right, Verified saw something happening. It started to play its role within it. And we were lucky enough to do an activation with them in the marathon this year, which was sort of another hack about nipples. But it was a great fun piece that built on that work. So I think, as Eleanor said, it's something that it's a gift that keeps on giving. So one of the things we see in PR is it can often be seen as a moment, but I think as building it into movements, like Dove has done so well, again, a brand that we've had a chance to work with over the years, they've understood what's at the heart of what they do and can keep that conversation going so that it doesn't bright light as firework, but it can keep the momentum. And I think that's what Vaseline have done so beautifully well.
So there's an ongoing debate in our industry about what actually counts as a PR campaign, especially when big ad agencies win the PR categories. Do you feel like the PR Lions still truly celebrates earned first creative, or has the line between advertising and PR blurred too much?
I was president of the D&AD PR jury this year. So it was a very interesting part of our discussion. And I'm sure it will form, Eleanor, part of your discussion. And actually identifying what we mean by that. And I know it is a good conversation that I say with a big smile on my face, because there is a school of thought where agencies are saying, watch out, PR companies, we know how to do it. I think, interestingly, it's the wrong discussion to have. I think this is about recognizing the power of a very different media landscape. 99% of people would like to skip the ads if they could. So that tells us a huge amount. It's up to, I think, between 3.5 and 6% more likely to trust work that comes in an earned space, which tells us a huge amount. So it is a battleground probably for all sorts of businesses to be playing in. But a truly earned piece of work plays slightly differently. As I say, it understands how to really leverage and maximize the channels available to it, the conversations to have, the communities in which to involve. So you see a very different way. One of the pieces of work I love is Vehicle of Hope this year, which was a totally earned PR piece of work and sort of in its purity. So I think it will be a really interesting discussion that we're going to keep having in the industry over the next year.
I mean, the point about the evolving and the changing media landscape, I think is absolutely true. And I think I don't see any end in sight for that. I feel like those lines are blurring, and actually I completely welcome it. I think, audiences aren't the ones thinking in PR versus advertising versus social. They're thinking about, well, they're not thinking about brands usually, and that's obviously our jobs and why we're all here. If I think about say, for example, a media outlet posting a story on their website or in print, and then a video version of that appearing in social, the audiences aren't going to delineate and say, well, that's the PR, that's the social, that's the XYZ. I really feel as though we need to be thinking about the storytelling, and actually, why shouldn't, if we're talking about advertising agencies coming and trying to eat our lunch, like, why shouldn't we come after theirs as well? Like, I think maybe that's fighting talk, I don't know, but I think actually, as an agency at Smarts, earned first is in our DNA. That was the foundation of our business. But now we're routinely responding to PR briefs with social first trends or things that are happening on social that we absolutely believe can drive great coverage. So I feel like we as an industry are still putting these kind of boundary lines and guardrails in place. And that's helpful to a certain degree for us to understand how we talk about ourselves and our work. But actually, I think for the benefit of brands and businesses as a whole, the more integrated these things become and the way that we think about them, the more consistent the brand presence will be. The brand shouldn't feel different from its TV campaign to its, earned work to its social. And I think keeping things in silos can often have that impact. And actually, with the way that the attention span and the overloaded landscape that we've got, it's hard enough to cut through. Like, I think we should really be aiming for as much consistency as possible.
Completely agree with everything that's been said, so I won't repeat any of it. It's important to remember our definitions are maybe a bit out of date. Define earned and define media, and then we can have a conversation. If you look at the definition of earned, it is to give something in order to receive something back. And actually, the things that are truly earned do that. There is a value exchange to that, often solving a cultural tension with a contribution from the brand. So I think work that is celebrated for doing that may well come from agencies that aren't traditional PR agencies, and so be it. If you forgive me a pun on this podcast, I would say perhaps it is the lines are blurring, but also the lions are blurring as well. Didn't even prep that. It is interesting to see PR agencies, including Burson, entering their work outside of the PR category in the same way that agencies that have done great earned work reaching outside of their social or their advertising category and into the PR one. So I agree with Nat, everything's to play for. If you have a great piece of work, then PR can succeed in very, very many Lions categories, not just PR.
That's really interesting. Okay, having worked both in advertising and in the PR industry, do you think PR is ahead or behind advertising now in terms of what's important to clients?
I don't think it's ahead or behind, but I do think there is an understanding of how to be dynamic in a world where the nature and process of advertising is innately slower. In many ways, the reason I'm loving my new life is when you work with a client and they come to an agency, the answer is advertising. Now, what's the question? Whereas we don't have an answer. We look at the problem and work out what the right answer is. And I think that, for me, has been really liberating for your thinking and your creativity. There is no cookie cutter response, and we're looking in a world that just is not same anymore. So there is less, I feel, and I'm amongst two much better experts than myself, but I feel that there is much more opportunity to do the right thing in the right moment, at the right time, in the right way from where we sit. But I do think there is a real role for both to play. But I'm increasingly understanding that if you bake earned thinking into your core strategy, you have a much better likelihood of being able to play your part in that dreaded word culture, because you are responding to it and you are understanding it and you've baked in your ability to do that. But that does not mean that the reach you can get from paid, be that in social or be it in wherever, is not invaluable as well.
Can I ask you, Kate, what made you decide to move into comms?
That is over a glass of rosé, a very long conversation. However, it's for many reasons, not least Mr. Richard Edelman, who is an incredibly charismatic and a wonderful person, and is someone with a real vision. And I genuinely believe an earned approach is the sort of future-facing way for us to help brands, businesses, societal problems solve their problems. And I also love the kind of hybrid way we work. So the way that we're more fluid internally, working with real experts. I've worked a long time with various governments and so forth. I've never had the advisors that I sit with now to sort of riff off and understand actually how can we have impact. Not how can I make a big splashy ad campaign that, will get noticed. How can I really meaningfully have impact? And that for me is what's really exciting. And I always say to people when they ask about, how do we win awards? I just say, make work that has impact. For me, that is the most important thing we can do. The rest will come, because it has to be brilliant. It has to be magnetic. It has to be unique. It has to be, beautiful and all those things. It has to be right time, right moment to have its moment. That's why I've done it. I find it thrilling, exciting, and at my age, you're never too old to learn.
Well, actually, Natalie and Eleanor, following on from that, do you expect purpose campaigns to win big again?
I feel like we've been talking about this for a very long
Quite a
time.
while.
And we did a nerdy bit of research a little while ago that actually tracked the PR categories obsession or lack of with purpose work. And do you know what? It undulates. It's never gone away entirely, but it has moved perhaps more into the backseat than it used to be, partly in place of novelty and humor and levity that the world frankly wanted and needed, and culture responded to work like that over the last couple of years. So you could have asked me that a few years ago and I might have had more pause. Is purpose important anymore? I think the answer is yes and no still and then. The thing, again, going back to that idea of a brand making a contribution to perhaps resolve a cultural tension in work that tends to be earned first, that can come from a place of purpose quite often. Because if you're bringing something to culture and saying, here, this is what we're going to show up with, that can take you into a purpose environment, but it is by no means the only way. And one of the bits that we've entered this year is for Ford, who made a rodeo belt buckle that holds your car keys, and it's called a truckle. And you know what? That's just funny. And we hope it does very, very well, not because it's purposeful in the traditional sense, but it showed up, it made a contribution, and it brings joy and levity that the world needed. So I think there's space for all sorts of campaigns. Purpose can often be mistaken for being the only way to make a contribution.
I feel like that word purpose has become so divisive, hasn't it, over the past couple of years? And I feel like as soon as that word hits any kind of conversation about our work, there are some people who instantly jump to the side of, we're not here to save the world, we're here to sell things, or we're here to, and it's become so binary to the detriment of probably lots of amazing work which has a purpose and can potentially contribute something or do something positive, but also can absolutely do the thing, which is the reason why anyone's paying anyone to come up with it, which is to help that brand sell some things or attract new customers. And that doesn't need to feel dirty either. I mean, if I think about, as we all do often, LinkedIn arguments I've seen, I saw a row that happened a little while ago about the Tesco campaign with, the gorgeous big kind of monster guy who's been made out of fruit. And that is, of course, to kind of showcase the fact that Tesco are giving free fruit to kids. And in describing that campaign, somebody used the word purpose, and it absolutely ignited, is this actually a purpose campaign? And And ultimately, I think it was a really lovely, articulation of something that Tesco are doing. Yes, of course, not totally altruistically, but I think things that are categorized as purpose campaigns kind of get removed from all the conversations about, actually, was it a really great idea? And did it drive any brand effects for the company? So I kind of hope that in the future, again, as we were saying about the integration of it all, maybe these campaigns should just be judged on the power of the idea, the relevance for that brand. I think that would be better for everyone.
I mean, I think you make such a good point. I think what's wrong with it, and increasingly businesses and brands do need to be transparent. Their values need to be clear. People do care about them, and it is important to them. So it's not a simple thing about one thing over here. They are interconnected, and that's a great example. And we need brands to step up and share those values and have a point of view on things. Probably in some of our work in an earned space, we might be seen to do more purpose-led stuff because it's a very important part of the conversation in the world. And people are interested in it. And sometimes we will be working for causes and businesses that are trying to have an impact and get their story out there without the millions and millions of dollars and euros that other brands might have. So we might be seen disproportionately at doing that kind of work. But I think the proof is in the impact it has. That's all we should care about.
Last year, there was a lot of AI hype, but what are you seeing now? Are we finally past using tech for tech's sake, or are we seeing agencies using AI tools for actual storytelling?
Was it all AI hype last year? I don't know. I think there was balance. I think there was a huge amount of discussion around the human hand and the AI tool. Everybody from Apple and every panel you went to was talking about protecting humanity and all of that. So I don't think there was necessarily AI hype. There continues to be a belief I see across the industry that you cannot substitute humanity with AI. You can't synthesize taste. You can't synthesize judgment in that way. It'll be interesting to see whether the conversation rumbles on about production versus other roles that AI plays in a far more nuanced way. If you think about the way we all use AI day to day, it isn't just in that craft sense that we think about it. It's in everything we do. It's in how we understand the world around us. It's how we fill in the gaps that perhaps we don't have the ability to do ourselves. But the biggest watch out for me is you can't synthesize empathy. And a big piece of what we do in Earned is to empathize with those communities that we're trying to communicate with and understand them. And I don't believe AI will ever be able to do that. So let's treat it as an investigation tool and see how we can then fill in the blanks. And I hope we have a nuanced conversation at Cannes about AI rather than this rush towards talking about it as taking over or a production tool that's going to make everything look the same.
Natalie, Kate, would you both agree, or did you see the AI hype?
I'm really curious as a kind of first time Cannes attendee. I'm really aware, I keep hearing a lot of the time, so many of the stages, so much of the content there is now driven by the tech companies. But of course, Cannes Lions, Festival of Creativity, and you've got all of these people attending who I think probably do still exist in a place of uncertainty between the future of AI and the future of job roles, how job roles function and evolve. I was speaking to one of the leaders, the AI leaders in our organization, who was explaining something to me called the Jevons paradox, where all the hype at the moment is around, efficiency and how that's going to free up all of this time. And actually, the reality often is that the resource usage is increased because the demand is increased and it almost just fills the space, but just in a different way. And he gave the example of there was a real scaremongering going on in the field of radiology, or radiologists won't be needed because AI will be able to replace all the radiologists and do all of that work. And actually, the only thing that's happened is that there has been a reduced uptake into people training as radiologists, which has become a real problem because actually it's not about them not being needed anymore. It's just them being needed in a different way and evolving their role. And I'm hoping that that is kind of where the conversation lands with us, that it's not humans versus AI and the battleground in between. I think it should absolutely be about where are we all best placed to do the best work and how can we, embrace where we are now and where we might go in the future in a way that kind of feels less fear-mongering and binary and more kind of collaborative.
The word binary is really good, I think. And last year, I think we did see that sort of versus conversation going on. I presume this year we're over it, but who knows? And I think understanding that sort of, artificial intelligence with human intelligence. I love what Eleanor said about, I do think we deal with empathy and there is an idiosyncrasy to some of our human storytelling, but as humans, we respond to the flaws more than perfection. That for me is sort of interesting in how we tell our stories. There's interesting, one of our guys was telling me, a writer, a lot of journalism is being written by AI, and now there is an AI that humanizes your pieces by putting mistakes back in. So we've come full mad circle in that way. And I think you're right. There are efficiencies. That is the norm of how we're working. There is an ongoing kind of evolvement of how we work. But I think what was interesting, we started seeing you have to declare that where AI has been used in your work, and you kind of go, well, that just feels a bit redundant now, but that's interesting already just in a year,
So this year, Cannes has introduced its new integrity standards following a series of controversies last year. Do you think it will work? If any of you don't know, Cannes has said that they may ban agencies for up to 3 years if they submit work that's willfully false or misleading.
Over the years, this has been a sadness, I think, about the nature of awards, full stop. In a way, we haven't done ourselves any favors as an industry as things have been made for awards. And I think it just came to a head. It's happened in the past as well. There's been work that people felt very uncomfortable about and had its awards removed from them when it became apparent that there wasn't integrity in the intent of the work, and which is why I think as practitioners, if we're always about the work, its role, its job, and what we're doing it for. If it wins awards and we celebrate it, we should celebrate it for being a brilliant example of what we can do. If it's done devoid of a client or a reason, even then maybe you can celebrate for its ingenuity. But we need to be honest about, how and where it's been done. And I think very often we like to reward degree of difficulty, i.e., making it for a real problem in the real world to really do something. And it would be a shame if we waste our time on, there's so much to do on the stuff that is just talking to ourselves in our own echo chamber.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is I think time will tell with this initiative if it's the sort of, I guess, the threat of punishment of the ban. I think it's like is it a 3-year ban, Eliza? That is clearly designed to act as a deterrent, right? And I think only time will tell whether it will deter people from maybe embellishing or being generous with the results or the AI declarations. So that would be my only addition is I don't think we know until we get a few years down the line of this being in place and work out whether it works.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nat, actually. And when we look at some of the dizzying numbers you see flash up on screen, case film after case film after case film, it can lead you to question, can those really be true? Particularly the reach figures, which are a PR's favourite. So I do think it will be interesting to see how time impacts some of these measures. But also let's look at the case films when we're all down in the basement together, looking at all the work. Are those numbers changing from what we've seen before? Are they becoming less inflated? Are they becoming more pragmatic and real? And there's no real data set to look at that, but I think we'll all sense whether those numbers start to feel a little more tangible. And the expectation is now that when you're judging, everything has been fact-checked with a senior member of the marketing or comms team at the organisation that the campaign represents. And that can only be a good thing for jury rooms, feeling that they have that confidence in the numbers rather than just blindly believing them.
Moving on to the last question, if you could give one piece of advice to a junior creative team who are dreaming about winning their first Lion, what would it be and what should they focus on?
Perhaps this is a little trite, but curiosity will be the best place to start. Despite all the tools, and we've talked about AI a fair bit today, really getting deep into an understanding of the community that you're trying to reach, not trying to shortcut that, and just getting weird about it, getting really, really into it. That is the best place that I would say a creative team should start, rather than sitting down and brainstorming. Start with curiosity and you'll stand yourself in really good stead.
I love getting weird about it. I think that's such great advice. You've actually mentioned the word there, which was the one I was going to focus on, which is depth. I've been doing a lot of thinking about depth. That's the subject of my talk next Wednesday. And I think in this kind of era of maybe friction being removed or speed, we're in this era of speed and volume. And I think it can be so easy to skip over the deep part and to maybe accept the first or second answer or idea that kind of emerges. And I think that through the conversations that I've been having, there is such a need still in, not everywhere, not in everything, but to go deep in the right places, either whether that's on the brief or whether that is in the communities, as you've said, Eleanor, around the culture piece or into the ideation. It's definitely easier than ever to avoid depth. And I think that there is such a value in making sure that there's space and there's time and there's the right kind of headspace for it.
I love both those, and I totally concur. Curiosity and depth. I always say problem. Really, really ask the question of what's the problem you're trying to solve. And nearly always the problem you've been given is not the problem you need to solve. So I think to Nat's point, going deeper, be like the kid, keep going why. And when you've got an answer to the why, ask the next why. And when you've got that answer, ask another one. Be insanely infuriating about the why, because you will get to what is the real problem we're trying to solve, which means you're going to be much more genuine and authentic in what you're then going to make. And it's going to be there for a reason and it's going to work. And then on Eleanor's point, the way you manifest that needs to be unique. It needs to feel it's something that you haven't just picked up from somewhere else. It has its own craft, it has its own story, and it has its own solution. So for me, it's just really find out what the real problem is to answer. And then don't chase the award. If I was being really simple to your question, and how do they win a lion? They don't try and win a lion.
Thank you so much. Okay, that's all that we have time for this week. Thanks to Kate, Eleanor, and Natalie. I hope you all enjoy the festival. Thank you all for listening as well. Until next time, goodbye.